السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته وأسعد الله مساءكم جميعا. Today we are going to discuss some points relevant to the previous lecture, which is choosing and narrowing a topic. In addition to that, I'm going to present a new topic, which is the thesis statement of your research paper. Now let us begin with this slide related to the previous lecture. In the previous lecture, I have in-depthly explained the main steps and tips for choosing and narrowing a topics. At the end of the previous lecture, I provided you with important tips to be followed when choosing a topic before arriving into the evaluation process. I mean evaluating your topic in terms of its validity, practicality, and researchability or workability. Today, and strictly in this slide, I'm going to explain to you some of the important tips in which you need to avoid when choosing the topic of your research paper. So the title of this slide is Tips on Choosing a Topic. Some don'ts, some don'ts, points. It is meant by some don't points, some points that you need to avoid when selecting your research, the topic of your research paper. So what are these points that we need to avoid when choosing a topic for our research paper? The first step is don't choose tried topics. So what is meant by tried topics? It means exhausted topics. And again, what is meant by exhausted topics? It means the topics that haven't become stale from too much discussion. This means that some of the topic is still available for doing research, for doing further research in terms of its content and of its methodology. So they are still need to be researched. How? Some of the points are already investigated by other researchers, whereas other points are an urgent need to be investigated by us as researchers. So this is what is meant by don't choose tried or exhausted topics. Topics that there is still a gap in their field to be investigated by the researcher. The other point, don't choose too contemporary topic. Sometimes you have interest in a specific and recently emerged issue or topics, but you might not find enough and sufficient reliable sources and evidences about it. So what is meant by too contemporary topics? The recently emerged two contemporary topics means the recently emerged topic. So when you select such a type of topics, you might find yourself, and here I emphasize on the word might. You might find yourself in a trouble. So what is the type of trouble here? The trouble is embodied by the limitedness in terms of the sufficient and reliable sources and evidence about it. When you have an intent or an interest to write a topic Of course, you can try depending your background information about the topic. You need to depend on past studies, and these past studies can be found in books. And these books give you evidences and reliable information to be followed and to be depended on when writing our new finding. Now let us take an example here. Today we are experiencing a health crisis, which is represented by the coronavirus. So this is a new issue, a new topic to be investigated by researchers in the field. So when we have interest to write about this topic, about this issue, we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we able to find enough and reliable sources and evidences about it? If yes, we can continue and select it as a topic for our paper. Otherwise, you will find ourselves in a serious problem presented by the insufficient sources and evidences about it. The third important point is that don't choose too obscure topic. You will find yourself in a serious problem if you choose a topic for which there is a few good sources in your library. So ambiguous topics are the topics which are liable to argument, to critical information, inhomogeneous point of view represented by the previous researchers. The last point is don't choose a topic just because you have read an interesting book about it. Of course, when selecting a topic, you need to select a topic within your interest. But this doesn't mean that you select a topic that you have an interest in it and you don't have sufficient resources about it. So reading an interesting book about your topic is not sufficient for you to select the topic for writing. Rather, you need so many sources. Now let us move to the content of our new lecture, which is also apart from choosing and narrowing a topic. But in this lecture, we are going to describe, to discuss, and in-depthly explain something or some issues related to a thesis statements. Before going into my explanation in this lecture, let me remind you of some of the important points of the previous lecture. The previous lecture, we have stated that there are 3 important points to be followed when choosing and narrowing a topic. The first step is choose your topic based on your preliminary reading and collection of resources irrespective of the source of this information. For example, you can find sources in the library, on the internet, can borrow from your friends, from your teacher, and so on. Then, based on the sources collected, we can narrow the topic which we have previously